The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. November had not arrived yet, but its cold had. The creeping, preparatory kind that gathered in the shadows of stone walls and made even the middle of the day feel like something was quietly going wrong. It was well past midnight when Albus Dumbledore set foot in Godric's Hollow. He had been at a ministry gathering when it reached him. That particular, unmistakable sensation of a protective ward giving way. A frequency he knew the way a doctor knew the sound of a heart that had stopped. He did not run. Running belonged to people who had not yet understood that haste produced mistakes, and mistakes here could not be undone. He moved quickly, wand already drawn, his mind already sorting the categories of what he might find into the sequence he could bear to face. The cottage's front wall was gone. Not damaged, gone. The stones scattered outward into the garden in a pattern consistent with a magical detonation originating from the upper floor. The oak tree in the garden had been stripped of its remaining leaves. A child's pull-along toy, a wooden duck on a string, lay in the path from the gate, undamaged, the only thing in the immediate vicinity that was. He stepped through the gap where the wall had been. James Potter was in the entrance hall. He had been there for some time, by Dumbledore's estimate, long enough that the matter had resolved itself in the way such matters did, in the cold and the dark, without witness. Dumbledore performed the necessary charm, the one that was not in any curriculum, that he had designed himself decades earlier for exactly the kind of aftermath that no one officially acknowledged occurred, and he covered James with the cloak he carried for fieldwork, and he climbed the stairs. The nursery door was open. What he saw, and what he concluded, happened in the following order. He saw Lily Potter at the far wall, and he understood immediately that she was beyond help, and he did not look at her for more than the moment required to confirm this, because looking longer would cost him the quality of attention that the rest of the room required. He saw the crib which was on its side, the impact that had knocked it over consistent with a shockwave rather than physical force. He saw 2 infants on the floor. This was the fact that reorganized everything that followed. Not immediately, because immediately he was reading the scene with the urgency that 2 small bodies on the floor demanded, confirming heartbeats, assessing injuries. Running the diagnostic sequence that his hands knew without requiring his conscious instruction. Both alive. One bleeding. The blood was at the forehead, a wound that was not, by any normal medical assessment, serious, a gash, recent. From a piece of falling ceiling stone the size of a man's fist that lay beside the child's head in a scatter of plaster dust. The wound was in the shape that falling masonry produced when it struck at a specific angle, jagged, roughly triangular, tapering to a point. Lightning, Dumbledore sat back on his heels. He had known, theoretically, that this night would produce a mark. The prophecy was explicit on the mechanism. The Dark Lord would mark his equal. He had expected a curse mark, the green afterburn of an Avada Kedavra redirected, leaving something impossible and visible on the skin of the child who survived it. He had not specified, even in his private thinking, exactly what form the mark would take. The lightning bolt on the older twin's forehead was the most legible answer the scene had available. He ran the diagnostic a second time. The older twin, Julian, he knew from Lily's letters, Julian Fleamont, named for both grandfathers, carried the wound. His magic red elevated, reactive, the specific quality of a core that had been stressed and was rebuilding, consistent with the killing curse's rebound, consistent with the prophecy's fulfillment. The younger twin, Harry James, had no visible wound. His magic read quiet, almost abnormally quiet for an infant who had just been in proximity to that level of magical detonation. Dumbledore attributed this to shock. He had seen magical cores go still in the immediate aftermath of trauma. It was, he understood, a protective response. He gathered both children. He was already composing the announcement in the next room of his mind before he reached the bottom of the stairs. He was not wrong to make the mistake. This is the important thing, the thing that would matter. Later, when the mistake had produced consequences that could not be undone. He was not careless. He was not negligent in the way of a man who does not care about the outcome. He was a man who, in the wreckage of a house in the early hours of the morning, with 2 infants and 2 bodies, and the specific time pressure of a situation that required decisions to be made before dawn, read the available evidence accurately. He read the available evidence. The available evidence was visible damage. What the available evidence did not contain, the interior of Harry Potter's magical core, where the backlash of the curse had landed not on the surface, but in the substance, absorbed rather than deflected, leaving no wound because it was not a wound. It was an inheritance. The curse had hit Julian on the ricochet's outer edge and left its mark on his skin. The curse's essential magical force, the thing the rebounding had actually transferred, had gone somewhere else entirely, following the path of least resistance into the smaller, quieter child who had been asleep on his side of the crib. Dumbledore would have needed a deeper diagnostic to find it. The deeper diagnostic took 8 minutes and required stillness and silence and a quality of uninterrupted attention that the burning cottage in the early hours of the 1st of November did not provide. He did not run the deeper diagnostic. He would not know this for many years. He would not know it until a 17-year-old boy stood across a room from him and produced magic that a child raised in Dumbledore's own curated educational program had never been taught, and even then the understanding would arrive slowly. Because the human capacity for revision is proportional to the cost of the revision, and this revision was going to cost something enormous. Sirius Black arrived at the cottage some 20 minutes after Dumbledore. He arrived not because Dumbledore had summoned him, but because Sirius had his own methods of reading the world's wrongness, and the wrongness of that October night was not subtle. He came through the garden gate at speed, and stopped when he saw Dumbledore's face in the gap where the wall had been, and the 2 men had a conversation in the garden in the dark that lasted less than 5 minutes and that changed the shape of the next 20 years. What Dumbledore said? Julian was the boy who lived, the chosen one, the child the prophecy had named. He would need to be raised to understand his importance, his role, his destiny. What Sirius heard, without this being said? Julian, not Harry. Julian is the one who matters. Harry is the other one. What Sirius did not say aloud, something in the garden diagnostic he had run automatically on arriving, an old Auror habit, the magical sweep that registered baseline signatures of everyone in a scene, had registered the quiet twin as carrying something that was not quiet at all, underneath the quietness. Something that read like an old word in a new language. He filed this. "I'll take Harry," he said. Dumbledore said, "That's very good of you, Sirius." The relief in his voice was real. The chosen one required careful cultivation, the other child required a home. Sirius was family. The problem organized itself. "I'll need it cleared up," Sirius said. "My legal standing. I need to not have to answer questions about custody." "I'll see to it," Dumbledore said. He did see to it. The false accusation that had never led to formal charges, the whispers, the suspicions, was corrected with the efficiency of a man who understood that a clean legal record was a manageable administrative task when you had the standing to manage it. Sirius was named Harry's guardian in the week following, with Dumbledore's personal attestation to the ministry. It was not, in the context of what else he was managing, the significant thing. The significant thing was Julian. Julian, placed in a borrowed house while the wizarding world organized itself around the fact of his existence. Julian, whose lightning bolt scar was being drawn by 3 different Daily Prophet artists before the ink was dry on the official announcement. Julian, for whom portraits were already being commissioned by people who had never met his parents, who felt entitled to a piece of him because he had survived something enormous, and survival was a public act when you were the size of a symbol. Dumbledore sat in the borrowed house and watched Julian sleep, and felt the specific quality of hope that he had taught himself to distrust. The hope that this time the chosen narrative was the right one. That this time the curated icon would serve the purpose intended. That this time the greater good would actually be good. He had learned the wrong lesson from Grindelwald. He had learned that the problem was insufficient control. The lesson had been that control was the problem. He would spend the next 17 years discovering the difference. 12 miles away, in the Black family's townhouse in London, baby Harry slept on a camp mattress on the floor of the private library. Sirius had put him there because the library was the warmest room in the house that didn't require the furnace to be lit, and because the library was the only room Sirius could sit in at 3 a.m. without wanting to put his fist through a wall, and because he did not want to be more than 6 feet from this child until he understood what he had felt in the garden sweep. The books lined 3 walls floor to ceiling. Old books, Black family books, some of them, with the specific smell of old bindings that had been in the same rooms for generations, and some of them Sirius's own acquisitions, the kind he had never been able to explain to his mother, the kind that smelled like different libraries entirely. The child slept in the amber light of a single lamp. His magic did what it had been doing since the cottage. Nothing visible. Nothing dramatic. Sirius was watching for exactly that quality of visible drama, the stirring of ambient objects, the temperature fluctuations that infant magic typically produced in proximity, and he was watching it not happen. What happened instead, very quietly, in the deep hours of the morning, was this: the book nearest the mattress, a volume on the theory of ancestral magical inheritance, spine cracked and pages dog-eared at 3 separate sections, slid 8 inches across the floorboard toward the child's outstretched hand. Sirius watched it happen. He looked at the child. The child was asleep. Sirius picked up the book. He turned it to the first dog-eared page. He read the passage that the page had been marked at, which was about the transference of magical signatures through proximity events, and what such transference produced in a sufficiently open magical core. He set the book down. He sat for a long time. "Oh," he said to no one, very quietly. 12 miles in the other direction. Julian Potter slept in a nursery full of gifts and warmth and the specific ambient hum of a world that had already decided who he was going to be. The portraits being commissioned would show a child with a lightning bolt scar and a destiny. The announcements being printed would name him the boy who lived, the vanquisher, the hope of the age. The library was the kind of room that did not commission portraits. It accumulated things differently: annotations and margins, bookmarks at significant pages. The slow accumulation of understanding that happened in private, without audience, without the specific distortion that audience produced. The book had moved. Sirius left the library lamp burning. He fell asleep in the chair beside the mattress with the book on ancestral magical inheritance in his lap, and the quiet certainty already forming in him like a cold thing, that what was asleep on the floor of his library was going to be something that nobody was currently planning for. He was the first person to have this thought. He would not be the last. Sirius Black was not, by any reasonable assessment, the obvious choice for raising a child. He knew this. He had known it since the morning after Godric's Hollow, when he woke in the library chair with a crick in his neck and a baby watching him from the mattress, with the specific evaluative attention of someone who had decided to reserve judgment pending further evidence. He had looked at the child, and the child had looked at him, and he had thought, with the clarity that arrived sometimes in the early morning before the day had complicated anything, "I am the only person in the world who understands what you are." This was probably not the standard basis for a custody arrangement. It was, however, an accurate one. The first 3 years were improvisation built on a framework Sirius assembled from 3 sources. The Black family library, which contained everything that was wrong with how magical children were raised and therefore served as an excellent negative model. His own Auror training, which had taught him that the most dangerous thing you could do with a capability you didn't understand was ignore it. And a letter from Lily Potter that he found in his own coat pocket 6 weeks after the cottage, which he had not known was there, and which he would never fully understand how it had arrived. The letter was 3 pages, written 2 months before she died. It was addressed to no one specifically, which meant either she had intended it for Harry or she had intended it for whoever found themselves in this position, and in either case the effect was the same. It said, among other things, he is going to be very quiet. Don't mistake the quiet for absence. The quiet is how he listens. He listens to things most people don't hear, and I have been watching him since March, and I believe he is listening to the magic itself, not just its products. Sirius read this letter on a Sunday morning with Harry in his lap, and Harry was, in fact, very quiet, and was in fact watching the lamp across the room with an attention that seemed, for a 10-month-old, somewhat disproportionate to a lamp. He read the rest of the letter. He adjusted the framework. By Harry's 5th birthday, the improvisation had become a curriculum. Not a formal curriculum. Sirius had seen formal magical curricula at Hogwarts and at his mother's knee, and what they produced, in his considered assessment, was people who knew the correct words for things they had never actually touched. The curriculum he built was the opposite. Harry touched things first. Theory came after, when there was something to attach it to. He learned the properties of magical materials by handling them. He learned the principles of ward work by taking apart the Black family house's existing wards layer by layer, with Sirius explaining what each layer was doing before they removed it. He learned about magical signatures, the specific fingerprint that every witch and wizard carried in their casting, by running identification exercises in the library with objects that Sirius had gathered from a variety of sources over the years. This last exercise was where something interesting happened. On a Wednesday afternoon in what would have been Harry's 3rd year of formal Hogwarts preparation, if Harry had been in formal Hogwarts preparation, Sirius laid out a row of 12 objects on the library floor. A mix of Black family heirlooms, Auror-grade evidence items, and 2 objects he had obtained from a private collection specifically because their signatures were educational. He asked Harry to sort them by what he could read from each. Harry worked through the first 9 in the order Sirius expected. At the 10th, he stopped. He held the object, a small carved stone pre-ministry, origin deliberately obscured, and he said, "This one has something inside it that doesn't belong to the stone." Sirius looked at the stone. "Can you describe what you mean?" he said. Harry considered for a long moment. Like a word in the wrong language. The stone is one language, and there's something inside it that's a different language. Not a different word, a different language, he said. Sirius wrote this down. He wrote it in the notebook he had been keeping since the night of the library lamp, which was now its 3rd volume. He wrote it precisely as Harry said it, and added his own notation, detection of embedded signature heterogeneity in inert object. Age 7. Unprompted, accurate, the stone contains a concealed monitoring charm of Auror provenance that does not match the object's inherent magical character. He found a signature mismatch. He closed the notebook. Very good. What's the 11th? He said. Harry put down the stone and picked up the 11th. The Granger girl entered the picture in the summer of Harry's 7th year, which was the summer before 2nd year preparatory work would have begun, if they had been following a conventional track. She was at the park. This was not a wizarding park. It was an ordinary London park near the Granger's dental practice. The kind with a climbing frame and a sandpit and benches where parents sat and watched children do the things children did. Sirius had brought Harry because Harry had been inside for 11 consecutive days, doing a self-directed reading project on the theory of runic compression, and Sirius had decided that 11 days was the threshold beyond which the outside world was not optional. Harry sat on a bench with a book. Sirius sat on the adjacent bench and read his own book, and accepted this as a reasonable compromise. The Granger girl was on the climbing frame. She was 7 years old, small for it, with the specific focused quality of a child who had decided to master the climbing frame through methodical practice rather than enthusiasm. She climbed to the top, assessed the slide, descended the climbing frame, went back around, and climbed to the top again. On her third circuit, she stopped at the top and looked at Harry. "What are you reading?" she said, from the top of the climbing frame. Harry looked up. "Theory of ancient runic compression and its applications in ward building," he said. "Is it good?" she said. "It's mostly right, but the third chapter has a logical gap in the argument about load-bearing rune sequences," he said. She climbed down the climbing frame. She sat on the bench beside him. "Show me," she said. He showed her. Sirius watched this over the top of his own book and felt the specific quality of a thing arriving that he had not planned for, and that was going to matter considerably. Her name was Hermione Granger. She was Muggle-born. Sirius identified this within 10 minutes of their meeting. She had the theory in the abstract. She had none of the tactile familiarity. When she argued with Harry about the third chapter's logical gap, she argued from the text's own internal logic, because the text's internal logic was all she had. She was also, within those same 10 minutes, more rigorous in her argument than anyone Harry had argued with before except Sirius himself. She was 7 years old and arguing from a position of pure theoretical reasoning, and she was not entirely wrong. "What did you think of her?" said Sirius that evening, when they had returned to the library. "She's going to be irritating," Harry said. "In a useful way or an obstructive way?" Harry thought about this with the seriousness he gave to questions that deserved seriousness. "Useful. She found a secondary gap I hadn't noticed," he said. Sirius nodded. "You should probably let her keep finding them," he said. "I know," Harry said. The silent pact, as Sirius came to think of it, was not a ceremony. It was not an articulated agreement. It was the product of 3 years of intermittent meetings at the park, and then at the Granger's house, and then, after Sirius had had 2 careful conversations with Emma and Dan Granger about the nature of the magical world and why their daughter's abilities required a context they were not currently providing, at the Black Family Library. What they agreed, without ever saying, that what they were doing was not for publication. Not because it was shameful, but because the moment it became visible to the machinery of the wizarding world, it would be managed, categorized, assessed, slotted into an existing framework. And their work was specifically directed at problems the existing frameworks did not address. Hermione said once, in the library, age 10, sitting across the table from Harry with 4 books open between them and a 5th in her hand, stories were the most powerful form of magic in the world, because they worked on everyone, including people who had no magic at all, including people who should know better, including Dumbledore, Harry said. "He's the one telling this one," Hermione said. Neither of them said what the implication of that was. They both understood it. In the summer before their Hogwarts letters arrived, Hermione had developed the soul resonance theory to the point where she could articulate it properly. She presented it to Harry in the library on a Tuesday afternoon, with the specific care of someone who has been building an argument for 3 years and has finally organized it into the form the argument requires. The core of it was this, in the texts she had found. 4 of them, none of them standard curriculum material. One of them in a language she had taught herself to read specifically to access it. There was a documented phenomenon in which a magical signature, subjected to a violent transfer event, left a harmonic residue in the receiving core. The residue was detectable by someone who knew the original signature's frequency. It expressed itself as a quality she could only describe, with the precision she always applied to things she couldn't yet fully name as a word in the wrong language. Harry went still. "I've heard that before," he said. "I know. You said it at 7. About the stone with the embedded charm. I've been thinking about it since," she said. "You were thinking about a theory of magical signature transference when you were 7? "I was thinking about why your description was so precise," she said. 7-year-olds don't have the vocabulary for signature heterogeneity. You had the vocabulary because you were describing something you could actually perceive. And if you could perceive it at 7 without training, She stopped. She looked at him. You didn't absorb the residue of the curse at Godric's Hollow. You absorbed the curse itself. Everything that made it powerful, everything the rebounding transferred. The scar on Julian's head is what the curse looked like from the outside. You are what the curse was, she said. The library was quiet the way it was always quiet. The quiet of a room that had been holding significant things for a long time and had become accustomed to the weight of them. Dumbledore doesn't know, Harry said. No, because he read the visible wound. Yes, Harry looked at the books between them. So the person they're building the whole story around, he said, is not the person the story is about, Hermione said. She said it without triumph, which was the only way it could be said accurately. Outside the library window, London was doing what it did in August, conducting its ordinary business with the specific indifference of a city that has seen everything and found most of it unremarkable. Somewhere across the city, in a house that Dumbledore had ensured was comfortable and safe and appropriately prepared for its occupants' public importance, Julian Potter was probably doing something that the wizarding world would find very significant. In the Black family library, Harry closed the nearest book. He put it back on the shelf in its correct position. The letters come in 3 weeks, he said. Yes, Hermione said. We should decide what we want to be before someone else decides for us. She was already reaching for the next book. The decision about which house took 3 conversations. The first was in the library, 2 weeks before the letters arrived, and it was theoretical. Gryffindor was where Julian was going. This was not a prediction. It was the only possible outcome of the narrative that had been constructed around him, and the narrative was by this point so thoroughly established that the Sorting Hat would have needed to be explicitly contrarian to produce a different result. Dumbledore had been planting Gryffindor symbolism in Julian's education for 9 years. The hat, which read minds rather than public relations campaigns, would find in Julian's mind 9 years of Gryffindor coded thinking and place him accordingly. This made Gryffindor inadvisable for Harry, not because of Julian specifically, but because of the proximity to Dumbledore's attention that sharing a house with the Chosen One would produce. Ravenclaw's social culture organized itself around independent study in a way that the other houses did not, which meant that 2 students who spent most of their time in private research would read as eccentric rather than suspicious. The Hogwarts Express contained, in its 11 cars, approximately 280 students of various years returning to school, and 47 first years making the journey for the first time. Of the 47 first years, approximately 43 of them became aware, at some point during the journey, that Julian Potter was on the train. The awareness spread the way these things spread. Someone saw him in the corridor, someone else told someone in the next compartment. The information moved through the train in the specific way of information that carries a charge of significance. Harry and Hermione were in a compartment at the end of the last car, discussing the 3rd chapter's logical gap. At some point during this discussion, the compartment door opened. A boy looked in, round-faced, with the specific quality of someone who had been moving through the train for long enough that the available seats had been exhausted. His name was Neville Longbottom, though Harry did not know this yet. "Sorry, can I?" he said. "Yes," Harry said. Neville came in and sat down and did not say anything else for 20 minutes, which Harry found appropriate. At the journey's midpoint, the compartment door opened again. A girl looked in. Red hair, freckles, the Hogwarts robe of a student who had siblings who had been here before. "Are you Harry Potter?" she said. "Yes," Harry said. "My brother Percy," he said. There's another one? Another Potter?" "I didn't know there were 2 of you," she said. "Most people don't," Harry said. She absorbed this. "I'm Ginny Weasley. I'm starting next year. I just wanted to," she stopped. "Sorry, he's up near the front if you were looking," she added. "I wasn't," Harry said. She looked at him for a moment longer. She said, "Oh." She closed the door. "Hermione, without looking up from the text she had retrieved, she expected you to be upset." I know. You're not. Julian being on the train is not a problem. Julian being on the train and being immediately identifiable to every first year on it while I'm down here with a book is an advantage. She looked up then. You've been planning the invisibility, she said. I've been planning to be legible as something they don't find interesting, he said. It's different. Invisibility is the absence of presence. I'm going for the presence they don't pay attention to. She considered this. The quiet twin, she said. The other one, he said. Yes, the Great Hall at 6 o'clock on the 1st of September was everything the literature had described, and different in every particular that the literature couldn't convey. The enchanted ceiling, the acoustic quality of a room where 500 people were attempting to be quiet, the smell of old stone and beeswax, and the faint early hint of the feast's coming. Harry read all of this in approximately 4 seconds. Then he found the positions of the staff table, the 4 house tables, the small stool with the patched and ancient hat on it, and the position of Albus Dumbledore, who was at the center of the staff table and whose attention was directed, with the specific focused warmth of a man watching something he had spent 9 years preparing for. At Julian Potter. When Julian Potter was called, the hall produced a sound between a gasp and a cheer, 600 people becoming very briefly a single organism. He sat down. The hat descended. 12 seconds later, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table's response was immediate, total. Ronald Weasley, seated nearby, led the applause with the enthusiasm of someone who had been promised something and was now watching it arrive. The twins, Fred and George Weasley, added a percussion section. McGonagall waited for the hall to settle. Potter, Harry, she said. The hall went quiet with the specific quality of a room recalibrating, the confusion of a theater audience realizing there is a second act they were not told about. Harry walked to the stool. He sat down. The hat came down over his eyes. The hat said, internally, well. Harry waited. The hat said, I have sorted a great many students in my time. I have sorted 3 sets of twins. I have never sorted 2 members of the same pair in the same ceremony with this particular. There is a word for what I am reading in you, and I don't think you know it yet. Harry said, internally, what is it? The hat said, it's in the older texts, the ones that predate the standard curriculum by several centuries, the ones your friend has been reading. A pause. She has the right theory. She's missing one significant piece, but she has the right theory. Harry said, which piece? The hat said, the one you haven't figured out yet either. I'm not in the business of spoiling conclusions. That's what the education is for. Harry said, Ravenclaw. The hat said yes. That's obvious. The interesting question is why it's obvious, and the answer to that question is considerably more interesting than the sorting itself. The hat lifted from his head. It said, to the hall, Ravenclaw. The Ravenclaw table clapped, the measured, interested applause of a house that assessed things before deciding how much energy to give them. Harry walked to the table and found a seat. Hermione sat beside him 30 seconds later. What did it say? She said, very quietly. That your theory is right, he said. I know it's right, she said. That you're missing one piece. She was quiet for a moment. Which piece? She said. The one we haven't figured out yet, he said. At the Gryffindor table, Julian Potter was receiving congratulations from people who had decided, before meeting him, who he was. At the Ravenclaw table, Harry Potter was already forgetting he had been sorted at all. He reached for the parchment in his robe pocket and continued the argument from the train. The troll entered Hogwarts on the last night of October through a third-floor entrance that had not been adequately warded since several years prior, when a routine maintenance cycle had been deferred and then forgotten. Hermione knew about the warding gap because she had been reading the castle's structural documentation since early October, which was available in Ravenclaw's restricted archive to students who demonstrated sufficient theoretical grounding. When Professor Quirrell burst into the Great Hall feast with his turban askew and his voice at a pitch designed to project raw fear. And doing it slightly too well, Harry noted, with the specific controlled modulation of someone who had rehearsed rather than experienced the emotion. Harry had already been running passive scans on the teaching staff for weeks. Quirrell's signature registered something he had noted with concern since the beginning of term: a double occupancy. 2 presences in one body, like a word in the wrong language. He filed this. He noted that the troll was not in the dungeons. He noted, from the corner of his eye, that Hermione had arrived at the same conclusion. In the general movement of 500 students being directed toward their common rooms, Hermione caught Harry's eye across the table. He read her expression, not the dungeons. He gave her the small nod that meant, "Where?" She gave him the almost invisible movement of her chin that meant, "3rd floor." He thought, the 3rd floor warding gap. The stone is on the 3rd floor. He stood up in the evacuation flow and moved against it. The rest proceeded with the efficiency of 2 children who had been training for problems that required thinking before acting. Harry managed the troll through environmental manipulation rather than direct magical assault. A water pipe in the corridor above the creature's position, the pipe already structurally compromised per the maintenance records, the failure reading as material fatigue rather than deliberate casting. The troll redirected toward the distraction. The access corridor to the stone was clear for the time they needed. He was back at the Ravenclaw table in his seat, with water on his left shoe from a puddle he had misjudged in the dark, when the teachers found the troll. Julian Potter had been found 2 corridors away from the original troll's location. He had gone looking for it. He had found a second, smaller troll that had entered through the same breach on a lower floor, had attempted to engage it with several spells of increasing desperation, and had been rescued by Professor McGonagall, who arrived 8 seconds after what the witnesses described as a charm that produced a large amount of light and a smell like burnt rubber. Julian had not been hurt. He had been awarded 20 house points for courage in the face of danger. He had also required a very thorough shower. Julian got 20 points, Hermione said. Julian went looking for a troll, failed to do anything useful with it, got covered in troll byproduct, and was rescued by McGonagall, Harry said. The 20 points are not inaccurate. Courage in the face of danger is not the same thing as competence in the face of danger. The stone's corridor was clear for approximately 11 minutes. Whatever Dumbledore has guarding it, the access was uncontested tonight. Quirrell's troll was a distraction, not a retrieval attempt. He was testing the response time. Yes, we need to know what's guarding it. The protections took 3 weeks to document. Not 3 weeks of continuous investigation, 3 weeks of accumulated incremental access, the specific methodology Harry and Hermione had developed over years of working in the Black family library. What they found, accumulated through library research, staff observation, and 2 carefully managed explorations of the 3rd floor corridor, Fluffy. A 3-headed dog sourced through Hagrid, a trapdoor beneath it, and a sequence of challenges that Hermione deduced through reading the minutes of the July staff meeting, archived in the Ravenclaw restricted collection, and cross-referencing with the castle's supply requisition records. The challenges, Devil's Snare, enchanted flying keys, an animated chess set, a logic puzzle involving potions, and at the end, the Mirror of Erised, which needed no requisition because it had been in the castle's storage for decades. A letter from Dumbledore to himself, filed under administrative correspondence in the headmaster's archive, and accessible to students with Level 3 library clearance which Hermione had obtained in October, read in part, "The mirror presents the cleanest final obstacle. It requires not cleverness, but desire correctly oriented. Only a child who wants to find the stone without using it can extract it from the reflection." He designed the whole obstacle course as a test, Hermione said. For Julian, Harry said, it's not protecting the stone, it's staging a narrative. When is Quirrell going to make his attempt? Before the end of term. During examinations, when student traffic is low and staff attention is elsewhere. That's 6 weeks. Enough time. They went on a Thursday night in late spring. The timing was chosen because Thursday's staff patrol schedule had a gap that Hermione had documented across 8 weeks of observation. The moon was new, and Sirius was in London for a ministry function. Fluffy was asleep, thanks to a small silver music box Harry had placed there 6 minutes before they descended. The Devil's Snare reached for them with the automatic enthusiasm of a plant that had been given one job and was executing it thoroughly. Hermione walked through it, not quickly, but with the deliberate calm of someone who had spent 2 hours in the herbology archive, understanding its mechanosensory trigger architecture, and knew that panic was what the plant was calibrated to respond to. The flying key room required 4 minutes. Hermione had identified the correct key from the Wingardium Leviosa broom's specifications, older, with the wear pattern of something that had been struck repeatedly, moving differently from the others. The chess set was the one that required genuine time. Hermione stood at the board's edge for 11 minutes, and then moved the pieces in a sequence that was not the sequence the board's design expected, not a player trying to win by defeating the opposing pieces, but a player trying to cross the board. The board took 40 seconds to process this objective, and then moved aside. Professor McGonagall's handiwork was genuinely elegant, and Hermione said so under her breath. The potion room contained Professor Snape's logic puzzle. Hermione solved it in the time it took Harry to read the label on the smallest bottle. "Left one," she said. He picked it up. The poison and the wine are in the largest vessels, because psychological intimidation requires apparent abundance. The forward potion is in the smallest vessel because the designer is Snape, and Snape's aesthetic is that significant things should not draw attention to themselves, she said. "That's very Snape," Harry said. Yes, he drank the forward potion. The Mirror of Erised was in the final chamber. Harry stood in front of it for approximately 4 seconds. He did not see himself in the mirror. He saw the stone. It was in his reflection's hand, and his reflection was placing it in his pocket, with the specific matter-of-fact quality of someone completing a task that was never going to be very dramatic, regardless of the circumstances. And then the stone was there, in Harry's hand, in the real room, heavier than he expected. He turned it once. He put it in his pocket. "Dumbledore designed this to give the stone only to someone who didn't want to use it," he said to Hermione. Yes, the mirror worked correctly and gave the stone to the person Dumbledore didn't know existed. "The mirror doesn't care about the story," she said. "It cares about the intention. They left the way they came." 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday night toward the end of term, Julian Potter descended through the trapdoor. Hermione had left the entrance accessible, because a closed entrance would have required explanation. He went through the Devil's Snare in a blind panic and emerged on pure adrenaline. He caught the correct key after 11 minutes of aerial pursuit. The chess set he crossed by sacrificing himself, which the board accepted as a classical winning condition, because Julian played chess the way the board expected to be played. The potion room he stood in for 4 minutes before choosing on instinct, which happened to be correct. The final chamber held the mirror. He stood before it. His reflection was holding nothing. Julian stood in front of the Mirror of Erised for 7 minutes, growing progressively more confused, before Quirrell came through the door behind him, and they had the confrontation that Dumbledore had designed the whole sequence to produce. The confrontation occurred. It was not brief, and it was not comfortable, and it confirmed, for everyone present including Julian, that Julian was brave and committed and genuinely wanted to do the right thing. It confirmed nothing about the stone, because the stone was not there. Quirrell left empty-handed. Julian was found by Dumbledore an hour later, sitting on the floor of the empty chamber with the mirror, reflecting his unencumbered hands, trying to understand what he had done wrong. He had done nothing wrong. The stone was in a black family vault in London under 4 layers of pre-ministry wardwork, next to a notebook entry in Hermione's handwriting, stone secured. Late April, shortly before midnight. Retrieval complete. No trace. The petrifications began in November of their second year. Mrs. Norris first, found on the last night of October, which Harry noted was the second consecutive Halloween at Hogwarts that had produced an incident worth documenting. He wrote in his journal, recurring October 31st pattern, either coincidence or meaningful. Insufficient data for conclusion. Track. He tracked. The subsequent petrifications came at intervals that were not random. Hermione had run the frequency analysis within 3 days of the second incident and shown Harry the result, a pattern consistent with a predator that was feeding rather than hunting, not strategic in the way a human strategist would arrange them, but paced in the way of something that had a biological cycle and was operating within it. It's not choosing victims for specific reasons, Hermione said. It's encountering victims of opportunity within its movement pattern. Which means there's a movement pattern. Which means there's a fixed origin point and a range. The pipes. The plumbing system. The castle's drainage and water supply runs through the walls in a network that predates the current structure. The passages are large enough. The original specifications were sized for maintenance access, which in the Founders' era meant access for adults, Harry said. She found the pipe network schematic. The incident locations all fall within 20 feet of a major junction, and the junction network connects to the second-floor girls' bathroom. Out of service since the 40s. No maintenance access since. No one has been in the connecting pipes in all that time. She looked at the schematic. Something has been living in the castle since then. Or longer. The school's theory about the heir of Slytherin was, by December, so thoroughly established in the student body's collective imagination that it had taken on the specific solidity of a thing that has been repeated enough times to feel like fact. Julian was the primary suspect. He was a Parselmouth, which had emerged in a dueling club incident in December, when a conjured snake had turned on Justin Finch Fletchley, and Julian had spoken to it, and the school had processed this through the framework available to them. Harry was certain Julian had not opened the chamber. The behavioral pattern of the attacks was consistent with a creature operating independently. Something was moving through the pipes on its own cycle, encountering students. If it were being directed by a student, the pattern would be different, more deliberate, more targeted. Harry wrote, "Creature is autonomous. Heir narrative is a school-generated explanation for autonomous predation. The creature is accessing the castle from a chamber. The chamber has a different heir." He underlined the last sentence. He found the entrance on a cold Wednesday in February. The Founders' architectural records, accessed through the library's deepest restricted archive via Hermione's clearance, described a chamber below the castle's lowest level, accessible through a concealed passage in a bathroom on the second floor. Harry stood in the second-floor girls' bathroom, which was haunted by Moaning Myrtle, who was currently occupying her U-bend and producing the specific ambient sound of someone who had decided to be sad about it indefinitely. He looked at the sinks. He looked at the snake on the tap. He said, in parcel tongue, "Open." The sink moved. The chamber was older than old. The columns were serpents, not decorated with serpents, but shaped into them by someone who understood that the column and the serpent were the same shape approached from different materials. At the far end, behind a wall of stone serpents, the basilisk waited. He could hear it, not the auditory signature of something moving, but the specific quality of a presence that produced a resonance at the edge of his perception, the low frequency that something very large and very old produced simply by existing. He said, in parcel tongue, "I know you can hear me. I'm not here to fight you." Silence. For 8 seconds. Then, from behind the stone wall, a voice that was the oldest thing Harry had heard with any of his senses. "You speak correctly." Harry said, "I know what you are. I know who made you. I know what you've been doing, and why. You know nothing about why. You were set to guard. Whatever you've been doing since the guard purpose was abandoned, you've been doing it because it's what you are. Not because it's what you choose. That's not nothing. That's worth acknowledging. A very long silence. The last speaker who came to this chamber came in the 1940s. He spoke correctly also. He asked me to kill. I'm not asking you to kill. What are you asking? Harry said. To stop. The conversation lasted the better part of an hour. The basilisk had been alone in the chamber for 6 decades. 60 years alone in a stone chamber below a school, with the specific acute intelligence of a creature that the founder's texts described as a being of magical refinement rather than mere power. 60 years of the pipe network as the only available territory. 60 years of encountering moving things in the pipes and responding to them in the only way available to a creature whose primary sensory output was lethal. It had not been choosing to petrify students. It had been encountering living things in the dark and responding with the only warning it had. It's been acting in self-defense, Hermione said that evening, in the only defensive register available to it. The diary, Harry said. This was the piece they had been holding. The Tom Riddle diary, which had been in Ginny Weasley's possession since September, placed there at Flourish and Blots in August, slipped into her cauldron during the confrontation between the Malfoys and the Weasleys, which Hermione had found documented in a shopkeeper's incident report filed with the Ministry. The diary was the orchestrating intelligence, directing Ginny through the basilisk's instilled loyalty to Slytherin's line. The diary is a Horcrux, Hermione said. They had reached this conclusion 3 weeks earlier. One of several, Harry said. Almost certainly. She closed the journal. The basilisk fang, she said. Basilisk venom destroys magical objects at the soul level. The shed fangs are in the far alcove of the chamber, per what the basilisk told me. Shed fangs retain potency for approximately a century. It's been shedding for 60 years and no one has collected them. She picked up her quill, the diary first. And then we start the list, she said. Julian Potter's confrontation with the basilisk occurred 3 weeks later, after Ginny Weasley was taken and the school's panic had reached the specific pitch of an institution that did not know what to do next. He descended through the bathroom entrance. Hermione had left it accessible, and he found the chamber. He walked its length. At the far end, he encountered the basilisk. He was without a working wand. Ron's had broken in the crash that had stranded them on the lower levels, and Julian had lost his in the initial disorientation of arrival. He encountered the basilisk with nothing but the specific bright courage of a boy who had been told for 10 years that he was the one who was supposed to be here. The basilisk, which Harry had spent several sessions in careful conversation with, did not kill him. From the chamber's doorway, where he had arrived through the parallel access passage that the Founder's architectural documents described, Harry said, in Parseltongue, "Stand down." The basilisk stood down. Julian, eyes still closed, said, "Who's there?" "The other one," Harry said. Julian opened his eyes. He looked at Harry across the length of the chamber, and for a moment, 8 seconds, Harry counted them. The story that had been built around Julian was not present in his face. The diary is already destroyed. "Ginny Weasley is going to be fine," Harry said. "How did you?" Julian said. "I'll explain outside." Harry looked at the basilisk. He said, in Parseltongue, "Thank you." The basilisk said, "The shed fangs are in the far alcove, south wall. Take what you need." Harry said, "I will." They walked out of the chamber together. At the top, Julian said, "You can talk to it." "Yes, since when?" "Since before I knew it was unusual." "Dumbledore," Julian said. "Doesn't know." Harry said, "And doesn't need to." "Not yet." Julian looked at him. "There's a lot you know that he doesn't know," he said. "Yes, are you going to tell me any of it?" Harry considered this. "Not yet, but more than I have been," he said. It was not a promise, and it was not a refusal. It was the precise truth of where things were. Julian received it as exactly that. The Board of Governors crisis arrived in June, and Harry had been preparing for it since March. The preparation began when Hermione finished cross-referencing the Chamber of Secrets incidents against the board's governance record and produced, in a Tuesday evening library session, a single page of notes. Lucius Malfoy was currently serving as the board's chair. The diary that opened the chamber had been slipped into Ginny Weasley's cauldron at Flourish and Blots by Lucius Malfoy in August. The connection was documented as a pattern of interest. He gave the diary to Ginny Weasley deliberately. I can't prove deliberate. What I can document: Malfoy supplied the diary, Ginny received it, the diary opened the chamber. The chamber's effects disrupted the school year sufficiently to provide grounds for board intervention, and Lucius Malfoy used the board's intervention authority to suspend Dumbledore. Those are documented facts in sequence. The sequence argues for deliberate. The sequence argues for interest. The documentation can make the interest visible. She pushed 3 documents across the library table. The first was the Board of Governors' founding charter. The second was the Black family's historical seat record, which documented the Black family's continuous representation on the board from the late 18th century until Sirius's father had died without formally transferring the seat, leaving it dormant. The third was a Gringotts institutional record showing the Black family seat as dormant, with active heir, not vacant. Not available for reassignment, but available for claiming. Sirius has an unclaimed board seat. It's been dormant for over a decade because no one told him the seat was dormant with active heir rather than simply vacant. The board had 12 members. Malfoy's influence came through the coercion of colleagues and a working majority he had assembled by pressure rather than by right. With Sirius's seat active, the board's balance shifted, not to dominance, but enough that the permanence proposal, which required a 2/3 majority under the founding charter, could no longer pass. Harry sent the letter to Sirius. 3 pages: the documentation, the claiming procedure, the analysis. Sirius responded in 48 hours. The response was 1 sentence. I have been an idiot for not thinking of this myself, and I will be at Gringotts on Monday. The seat was claimed on a Monday, with Sirius executing the declaration at Gringotts with the specific efficiency of someone who had been handed clear instructions and had followed them precisely. The authentication confirmed. The board secretary was notified, not the chair as the founding charter specified, because the chair had a conflict of interest in recording new seat activations that might affect their majority. What was disclosed afterward came from Griselda Marchbanks, who was one of the members who had been voting against Malfoy's agenda for 2 years, and who sent Sirius a note after the meeting, his face when your name was read from the seat register. I have been on this board for 14 years, and I have never seen Lucius Malfoy genuinely surprised by anything. He was surprised. The permanence proposal was withdrawn within 4 minutes of the vote being called. He knew he couldn't win, and he withdrew it before losing publicly. A very Malfoy response. She added, "Welcome to the board, Sirius. We have needed you for a long time." Sirius shared this with Harry and Hermione on a Saturday afternoon in the Black family library. A very Malfoy response, he said. It was the correct tactical choice on his part. A public loss would have been worse than a strategic withdrawal. But the withdrawal means he knows the majority is gone, Hermione said. He'll always be looking for a different mechanism, Sirius said. The question is whether we're ahead of the mechanism before it arrives. We've been ahead of the mechanism before it arrives since first year, Harry said. The board inquiry into the Chamber of Secrets followed. Sirius requested it under his authority as a board member, a formal investigation into the school safety incident's origins, requiring Malfoy to explain the diary's provenance under oath. It took the better part of a year to complete, and ended with Lucius Malfoy resigning from the board under the specific pressure of a formal inquiry that had made the pattern of interest visible to 12 people who had standing to act on visibility. He was not convicted of anything. He was Lucius Malfoy, and conviction required a standard of proof that the documented pattern did not reach. He resigned from the board. This was not nothing. Harry noted it in the journal on the day the resignation was announced. A brief entry, factual, Sirius, reading over his shoulder, said, "That's a victory, Harry. You're allowed to note it as a victory. It's a step. It's a very satisfying step." Harry wrote, below the resignation entry, Malfoy off the board. Sirius's seat active, board composition, functional. The diary's origins documented in the formal inquiry record. Not a conviction. A step. He read what he had written. He added, at the bottom, satisfying step. Sirius, reading over his shoulder, there it is. The Horcrux list had 7 entries, and by the end of their 4th year, 5 had been addressed. The diary was gone, destroyed in the chamber with a basilisk fang in their 2nd year. The ring was in the gaunt shack on the edge of Little Hangleton, which Hermione had found through property records, and which Harry had confirmed through a visit that identified both the shack's location and the ring's signature within it. The ring was cursed in a way the available documentation described as lethal to anyone who touched it without understanding what they were touching. Hermione had spent 3 weeks developing the approach. She had described it as, not a retrieval problem, a disarmament problem. They had disarmed it in the spring of their 3rd year, retrieved it, and the basilisk fang had done the rest. The locket was in a cave on the southwestern coast. It had required a blood price to access, which Sirius had paid on a Tuesday night without complaint, and with the specific quality of someone doing something unpleasant that was nonetheless the correct thing to do. He was sick for 3 days afterward, and told Harry it was worth it twice, which meant it was not quite worth it, but he needed it to be. The cup was in the Lestrange vault, still a problem. The diadem was in the Room of Requirement, which Harry had found in their 2nd year through the Founder's architectural documents. The room had surrendered the diadem with the specific ease of a magical object that had been waiting to be found by someone who could find it. The snake was alive. The 7th was in Harry. 5 of 7 addressed. 2 remaining. In the summer between their 3rd and 4th years, a ministry letter arrived addressed to Julian specifically. It was from Cornelius Fudge's office, proposing a public engagement during Easter break, Julian Potter hosting a ministry educational delegation at Hogwarts. Delivering an address about his experiences as the first student of his generation to encounter genuine dark magic firsthand, and posing for a photograph outside the main entrance with the minister and senior aurors. The letter used the phrase "the boy who lives" unique perspective 4 times. Hermione read it twice. Fudge wants a photo opportunity. The current minister's approval numbers have been declining. There's a piece in the Daily Prophet archive from 3 weeks ago. And he's currently advancing 3 pieces of legislation that would expand ministry oversight of private magical education. The kind of oversight that would give the ministry authority to review what is being taught in private magical libraries by individuals not registered as formal educators, she said. So, a photo with Julian while advancing that legislation, Harry said, associates him with the position without his having endorsed it. Julian is the boy who lived. If Fudge photographs himself with Julian and publishes it while the legislation is being discussed, the implication is that Julian doesn't object to expanded ministry oversight. A discussion with Sirius through the flue that evening led to the discovery of a relevant provision in the Potter family's historical governance documents, registered with Gringotts in the early 19th century. A limitation on third-party use of the Potter name and image in political contexts, without the explicit written consent of the estate's controlling authority, requiring formal notice and a filing period. As of the governance documents registered with Gringotts when Harry turned 13 and the age provision in his grandfather's will activated, the estate's controlling authority was the Potter Trust. 2 trustees, Sirius as primary trustee appointed in James's will, and Harry as secondary trustee. Julian is the estate's primary beneficiary, Sirius said through the flue. Beneficiaries don't control governance. That's standard trust architecture. The ministry needs trustee consent to use the Potter name or image in a political context, Harry said. Written consent, with formal notice. The provision was written specifically because Harry's grandfather had a very unpleasant experience in the 40s with a ministry official who used the Potter name without asking. I never got the full story, but it clearly left an impression. The conversation with Julian happened in a small reading room adjacent to the library. No portrait coverage, per Hermione's architectural survey. And Harry gave him the provision document, the legislation summary, and Hermione's analysis. Julian read all of it slowly. Fudge wants to regulate private magical education, he said. Yes, I don't approve of that. I know. If I don't do the event, Julian said. The ministry has to file the consent paperwork under the provision. Filing takes its required period plus Gringotts processing. The Easter break window for the Electoral Digest deadline is too short. And they can't force me to do it, not without Dumbledore's explicit approval, which Dumbledore will not give once he understands what the legislation does, because the legislation would also affect Hogwarts' curriculum autonomy. I'm going to tell Dumbledore I'm not doing the event. I'm going to say I feel uncomfortable being used for political purposes. He paused. That's true, Julian said. Yes, I'm not going to mention the legislation, or the trust provision. That's your choice. Julian stood. Harry, he looked at the table for a moment. The longer conversation. The things I don't know about. A pause. I want you to know I'm trying to be someone it would be safe to tell, he said. I know, Harry said. The Triwizard Tournament was announced at the start of Term Feast in September of their 4th year, and Harry had known about it since June. This was not prescience. It was the product of Hermione's practice of reading the ministry's legislative agenda in conjunction with Gringotts' institutional calendar, which tracked major international magical events because major international magical events produced vault activity that Gringotts monitored for treaty compliance. The Goblet of Fire was a Founders-era artifact. They had found the goblet's historical documentation in August, not the ministry's documentation, which described it as a selection mechanism with an age restriction, but the original authentication records that Gringotts held in their historical archive and that Sirius had accessed under the Black family's standing research permissions. The original documentation described the goblet as responding to magical signatures at the level of their inherent nature rather than their presented identity. And there was a submission category, documented only in those original records, for what the founders had termed a sovereign claimant, a witch or wizard whose magical core carried a transferred founder's class signature, and who was therefore eligible to be recognized by the goblet outside the 3-school structure. Hermione had read this documentation 3 times. She had said, your signature, the absorbed curse signature, the soul resonance, it reads as a different class of magical identity than a standard wizard. The goblet's authentication is designed for that class. If you submit separately from Julian, the goblet might select you as a 4th champion. She had drafted the submission parchment herself, in Founders-era high magical Latin, that she had taught herself over the summer from a grammar and vocabulary text in the Black family library. On the night of the submissions, Harry walked to the goblet at 1:45 midnight. 13 minutes before the window closed, he dropped the parchment in. The goblet flared, not the standard blue-white of a standard submission, something deeper, the specific quality of a light responding to something it recognized. The flame held for 3 seconds longer than any submission Harry had watched from the library doorway. Then it returned to its standard color. The selection ceremony had the specific quality of all ceremonies that have been designed around an expected outcome and then encounter the unexpected. Victor Krum. Fleur Delacour. Julian Potter, the Gryffindor table's response substantial. Dumbledore's expression, the expression of a man whose plan is proceeding on schedule. The goblet flared a 4th time. Dumbledore read the emerging parchment. His expression became very still. Harry Potter, sovereign claimant, he said. The goblet's selection could not be undone. In the champions' room, Bartemius Crouch Sr. reviewed the founder's Latin submission and confirmed that the sovereign claimant designation was a valid historical category that the goblet was authorized to recognize. He said this in the tone of someone who would have preferred to say something else, but had found nothing in the documentation that permitted it. Dumbledore looked at Harry across the champions' room. Harry looked back. "I wasn't aware you had access to Founders-era authentication language," Dumbledore said. "I have access to a great many things," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I'm beginning to understand that." The 4 champions took their places for the dragon task. Victor Krum, Fleur Delacour, Julian Potter, Harry Potter. Julian drew the Hungarian horntail, the most dangerous of the 4, which Harry had anticipated. He watched Julian's approach, brave and creative, relying significantly on a summoning charm executed at distance. It worked. The horntail was distracted, the egg was retrieved, Julian emerged with a burn on his left forearm, and the expression of someone who had done something difficult and knew it. The crowd's response was substantial. Harry had the Welsh green. He approached from the direction the dragon was not facing, having read the creature's sensory orientation through the ambient magical field before entering its line of sight. He retrieved the egg in under 5 minutes without the dragon fully registering his position. The crowd registered it as competent and somewhat anticlimactic. He heard, from the stands, a second-year Hufflepuff say, "The other Potter just kind of walked up and got it." This was the most accurate description of the task he heard. He added it to the journal. The second task required locating something taken from each champion and retrieved from the lake's depths. Harry was in the lake for 31 minutes. He used a water-breathing modification that Hermione had developed in January and that he had practiced in the Black family's basement pool since February, operating not by transforming him physically, but by modifying his breathing to process dissolved oxygen from water. He located Hermione using the signature reading capability he had been developing since the Black family library's assessment exercises. Her signature was the one he could read most precisely because it was the one he had been reading the longest. He emerged from the water with Hermione and helped her to the bank and gave her the towel and said, "The clue. Did you hear any of it? The merpeople sing at a frequency that's partially above human auditory range. I caught about 60% of it. We need to listen to the egg in water. The encoding is acoustic. The contents are compressed into a frequency that's intelligible only in a medium with higher acoustic density than air," she said, pulling her wet hair back. "We have a basement pool. I know. I'll be at Sirius's in 3 weeks." From the judges' table, Dumbledore watched Harry emerge and wrote something on the scoring parchment with the expression of someone developing a theory. The maze task was third and final. Harry entered from the south position. He moved through the maze with the specific quality of a person who had memorized its architectural logic from the ground-level survey Hermione had conducted in the week before the task, reading the maze's construction as a system with identifiable patterns rather than as an obstacle course of random challenges. The person who had designed it, a detail he had noted from the supply requisition records, had applied their logic consistently, and consistent logic was readable. He reached the Triwizard Cup in 22 minutes. He stopped. He ran the passive scan on the cup. The scan returned a signature anomaly of the specific class he had been trained to identify since he was 7 years old. The cup was a portkey, not a standard one, but a portkey with a deliberate destination encoding that was not the standard return to starting point protocol. A portkey going somewhere specific, chosen by someone who was not the tournament's official organizers. He stepped back from it. He took his wand out. He applied the portkey disruption charm that Sirius had taught him during Auror training discussions, an Auror standard technique designed to destabilize a portkey's destination encoding. Critically, the disruption was activation-specific. It would affect the next use only, degrading the program destination for a single activation and then resetting. so that subsequent users would be routed to the original programmed destination. He used it on himself. He pocketed his wand. He walked to the cup and picked it up. The portkey activated and deposited him, precisely as the tournament's official protocols specified, at the starting position outside the maze. He was the first champion to emerge. Julian arrived 11 minutes later, slightly scratched, having encountered a blast-ended Scroot and a boggart in the maze's northeast quadrant. He emerged to significantly more enthusiastic applause. In the champion's reception, Fleur Delacour stood beside Harry and said, in her careful English, "The cup. You changed something about it." "Yes," Harry said. "It was going somewhere it should not have gone." "Yes, the disruption I applied was activation-specific. It will still take the next person who touches it to the original programmed destination." She looked at him carefully. "Then someone else may still be sent there." "Yes, that's why I'm keeping an eye on who goes near it tonight." "You are a very different kind of person than your tournament position suggests," she said. "Most people are, once you get past the position," he said. The graveyard was in Little Hangleton. Harry had known this since the spring, which was when the portkey's destination encoding had been sufficiently readable to cross-reference against the Black family's genealogical records, which contained detailed documentation of the Gaunt family's historical connection to a specific village in the Yorkshire countryside. The Gaunt connection to Little Hangleton was documented across 4 separate texts in the library. He had gone in February, alone, on a Saturday. He had taken the night bus to the village's outskirts and walked the perimeter of the graveyard. There were 2 significant magical objects in the graveyard's general vicinity. One was a grave marker that registered at the specific frequency of old blood magic, a potter, he realized after a moment, reading the name from the gate. His grandfather's ancestor, several generations back, resting in the village where the Riddle family had also made their mark on history. The other significant object was in the large manor house on the hill above the village, producing the specific quality of resonance he associated with Horcrux signatures. He had added it to the list. On the night of the Triwizard final, when it became clear that the activation-specific disruption had worn off and Julian had touched the cup, Harry saw the flash at the maze exit and the empty starting podium simultaneously. Harry was already moving. He arrived in the graveyard via a secondary means, having prepared for this contingency in March, a portkey of his own, keyed to the village's outskirts. He arrived 40 minutes after Julian would have. Julian was in the graveyard, disarmed, with Peter Pettigrew holding his arm and raising a knife. The bundle Pettigrew carried with his other arm registered at close range with the specific quality of a diminished magical entity, not the distributed resonance of the Horcrux network, but the central intelligence, concentrated and present. Voldemort, reduced, insufficient, but aware. Harry stepped from behind the elder tree. He said, in Parseltongue, to the bundle in Pettigrew's arms, "Your information is wrong." The bundle went still. Julian looked at Harry. Harry said to Julian, quickly, in English, "Don't move. Don't cast. Let me speak first." Julian, to his genuine credit, did not move and did not cast. The voice from the bundle was high and cold. "You speak the tongue." Harry said, "In Parseltongue, I have spoken it since before I knew it was unusual. I speak it because of what you put in me in 1981. A silence. The voice said, "You are not the one they named. No, the one they named is standing beside you. Yes, the one standing beside you is not the one I marked. No, you marked him with a chunk of falling masonry. You marked me with the curse itself." The specific quality of the silence that followed was not the silence of someone receiving incomprehensible information. It was the silence of someone receiving information they had, at some deep level, been suspicious of for years, and had not examined because the examination required accepting an error of significant proportions. Harry said, "In Parseltongue, you have been hunting the wrong twin for 13 years. The resonance you built into the anchors, the signature you left in the curse's backlash, it is in me, not in him. Every Horcrux you made resonates with me, not with him. He is the public story. I am the actual problem. A very long silence. Then, show me. Harry reached inward, into the specific place where the absorbed signature lived, the word in the wrong language that had been present since the night in Godric's Hollow, and he turned it outward. Not an attack. An identification. The resonance between what he was projecting and what the bundle contained was immediate and undeniable and produced, in the graveyard. A cold that had nothing to do with temperature. The voice said, very quietly, 13 years. Yes, and then, what Harry had never expected to read in Voldemort, at any level, in any form, reduced or otherwise, fear. The genuine variety, the specific cold quality of an intelligence that had spent 13 years building its strategy around a foundational assumption and had just discovered the assumption was wrong, and that the person standing before it was the one it should have been afraid of the entire time. Harry said, in Parseltongue, you cannot complete the ritual with his blood. The ritual requires the blood of the one you marked. His blood and mine are chemically identical. But the magical difference is not chemical. I know, the voice said. Then you know the ritual will not produce what you intend. A silence. What do you intend? The voice said. Harry said, to finish the list. In the correct order. Without this, he looked at Pettigrew, who had been standing motionless for the duration of the Parseltongue exchange with the specific quality of someone who could not understand what was being said and was therefore defaulting to not moving until he received an instruction. He is telling you to put him down. He's telling you this because the ritual won't work, said Harry, in English. The bundle said, in English, for Julian's benefit, set me down, Wormtail. Pettigrew set the bundle down on the grave marker. The voice said, with the quality of an old intelligence encountering something that was, despite everything, genuine, you are going to destroy me. Yes, Harry said. When the list is complete, how much of the list remains? Harry said, enough that tonight is not the night. He looked at Julian. He looked at Pettigrew. Take him back to wherever you've been keeping him. This is not over. But tonight is over, he said. Pettigrew picked up the bundle and left. Julian waited until the sound of footsteps had faded. What just happened? He said. He realized he had the wrong twin, Harry said. And then he left. Because I told him tonight wasn't the night. And he listened. He's afraid of me, Harry said. He's been afraid of the wrong person for 13 years, and tonight he found out. That changes the nature of the fear. It doesn't remove it. It redirects it. Julian looked at the grave marker where the bundle had been. Harry, he said. Yes, the longer conversation. Harry looked at the graveyard around them, the white marble of the Riddle grave, the elder tree, the gate at the end of the path. Yes, he said. Now, they sat down on the cemetery path, which was cold and slightly damp, and Harry began. The longer conversation lasted 4 hours. They sat on the cemetery path in Little Hangleton until the cold became something they were managing rather than noticing, and Harry told Julian everything in the order it had happened, which was not the most dramatically organized order but was the most accurate one. Julian listened. He received the soul resonance theory, the goblet's recognition of the sovereign claimant designation, the Horcrux list and its current completion status, the graveyard's significance, Harry's February visit, and all 7 entries on the list, without interrupting, except twice. The first interruption was at the soul resonance theory. Hermione worked this out, Julian said. We worked it out together. She found the theoretical framework. I provided the primary evidence, Harry said. The evidence being you. Yes, she's been building a theory about your magical identity since you were 10. Since before that, technically, Julian was quiet for a moment. She's extraordinary, he said. Yes, the second interruption was at the Horcrux count. 5 of 7, Julian said. Yes, and the 6th is? In me. Yes, and the 7th. The snake. Nagini. She's with Pettigrew. Accessible in theory, difficult in practice until the other variables are resolved. And the extraction, Hermione has a theoretical solution. She's been developing it for 2 years. She won't implement it until the external Horcruxes are complete. What does the extraction involve? Julian said. The soul resonance creates a channel between my magical signature and hers. The Horcrux fragment in me is a foreign element. It doesn't belong to either signature. She can draw it out through the channel and destroy it without destroying me, Harry said. Julian was quiet for a long time. Has she told you what it costs her to do that? He said. What do you mean? The channel runs both ways. Drawing something out of you through a connection that specific costs something on both ends. She hasn't described the cost, Harry said. Have you asked? He was quiet. Ask, Julian said. Yes, Harry said. They sat in the graveyard in the specific silence that arrived after significant information had been exchanged and had not yet been fully integrated. I've been performing a role for 4 years that I wasn't suited for, and you've been doing the actual work and not telling me. You could have told me, Julian said. I know, Harry said. Then why? Because telling you earlier would have been telling a version of you that was, Julian, you are not the same person you were in first year. The person you were in first year would have taken the information and done something with it that was brave and direct, and would have told Dumbledore immediately, because that was the correct response from inside the framework Dumbledore had built for you. Julian was quiet. The chamber changed something. I've been watching it for 2 years. The way you processed the graveyard tonight, you didn't move, you didn't cast, you listened. That's not the quality you had in first year, Harry said. The chamber was where I found out I was outmatched. Yes, and the finding out produced a quality that the previous version of you didn't have. You waited for me to be ready to hear it, Julian said. Yes, a long silence. I'm angry. I'm angry at the right person. I'm angry at Dumbledore for building a world where any of this secrecy was necessary, Julian said. Yes, not at you. You don't have to decide that tonight, Harry said. I've decided it. He looked at the cemetery gate. What do we do now? Julian said. We finished the list, Harry said. The list took 8 months. Julian was part of the finishing. What Julian brought, the specific intelligence of someone who had been inside Dumbledore's orbit for 4 years and understood, from the inside, how Dumbledore structured information and access and permission. Julian knew which doors Dumbledore expected to be closed and which ones he assumed were open, and the gap between those 2 categories was, in several significant instances, exactly the gap they needed. The cup in the Lestrange vault was resolved through the board. Sirius, as a board member with standing to request regulatory inquiries into school safety incidents with dark artifact connections, filed for a Gringotts compliance inspection of the Lestrange vault on the grounds that it contained dangerous artifacts posing ongoing public safety risks. The inspection found the cup. It was classified as a restricted magical object under the Dangerous Artifacts Act and held in Gringotts' restricted archive pending disposal. Hermione arranged the disposal. Basilisk Fang. Vault retrieval forms in triplicate. The snake was with Pettigrew, who was in a house in Yorkshire, 12 miles from the graveyard, which Harry had tracked through the resonance. The approach required a precision that Hermione had spent 2 months designing and that Julian executed on a Wednesday night in February, while Harry held the perimeter and Hermione managed the ward architecture from the access point. Julian's execution of the approach was efficient and left no trace. Harry noted this in the journal. Julian, given a specific task with specific parameters, performed it with a quality that had nothing to do with the story that had been built around him, and everything to do with what he actually was, a person who was brave and direct and capable when the situation was one he genuinely understood rather than one he was performing. The list was complete in February of their 5th year. What happened to Dumbledore was not a confrontation. Harry had been thinking about this since the graveyard. The question of how to handle Dumbledore, what handling him meant and what it cost and what it produced. He had discussed it with Hermione, who had constructed 3 scenarios with projected outcomes. He had discussed it with Julian, who had said, with the specific directness that was now his primary register, he needs to know he was wrong. That's not punishment. That's information. Sirius, consulted by Flu on a Tuesday, he's not a bad man. He's a man who made a very consequential error and has been building a world around the error for 14 years. Confronting that requires what the chamber required for Julian. The finding out. The finding out happened in March. Harry requested a meeting with Dumbledore, formally, through Professor McGonagall, with the quality of a formal request that communicated, this is not a student asking for a teacher's time, this is one party requesting a meeting with another party. Dumbledore received them in his office, Harry, Hermione, Julian, and Sirius, and read the quality of the group in approximately 10 seconds, and sat down with the expression of someone who had known this meeting was coming and had not known what form it would take. Fawkes stirred on his perch and was still. Harry gave him the soul resonance theory, the documentation, Hermione's research, the goblet's recognition, the list and its completion, the graveyard, all of it, in the order it had happened. Dumbledore listened. He listened with the quality that was, Harry thought, the best version of what Dumbledore was. The genuine attention of someone who had spent a very long time being the cleverest person in every room and was now receiving information that required him to revise the model he had built across 14 years of being certain he was right. The sorting hat on its shelf tilted very slightly as if adjusting its position to hear better. When Harry finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. I didn't run the deeper diagnostic, he said. No, I had the tools. In my haste to understand what I was seeing, I read the available evidence, and yes, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at Julian. You built a world for me that wasn't mine to inhabit, Julian said. Yes, Dumbledore said. I did it anyway because everyone told me it was right. Yes, it wasn't right. No, Dumbledore said. It was not. He was quiet again. The list is complete, he said. Yes, Voldemort is mortal, Harry said. Has been mortal since February. He doesn't know the list is complete. He knows the snake is gone. He'll have felt it. He doesn't know why. He thinks it was Julian. He thinks it was Julian because Julian was the one visible. Yes, Dumbledore looked at Sirius. You should have told us both what you knew in the autumn of '81, Albus, said Sirius, with the specific restraint of someone who had many things to say, and had decided the moment required selecting carefully. Yes, Dumbledore said, I should have. That conversation is not over. No, I understand that. He looked at all 4 of them. What do you need from me? He said. Access, authority over the final confrontation's terms. And, he paused, honesty, with Julian specifically. About what you built and what you didn't, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at Julian. Julian held his gaze. That conversation is long overdue, Dumbledore said. Yes, Julian said. It is. The Order of the Phoenix reconvened in the spring, in a meeting that Sirius chaired rather than Dumbledore, which was the visible signal of the shift that had occurred without anyone announcing a shift. Harry and Hermione were present. This was the first Order meeting either of them had attended. The Order's members received the soul resonance theory, the list's completion, and the framework for the final confrontation through a briefing document Hermione had prepared, 6 pages, indexed, with a summary on the first page. Alastor Moody, the real one, restored to himself after the 4th year's disruption had been understood and addressed, moving with the specific contained violence of a man who had seen too much to be surprised by most things, but was allowing himself to be impressed by this, read all 6 pages and made notations in the margins. He looked at Harry once, a long, assessing look, and said nothing, which was Moody's version of approval. Professor McGonagall read the first 2 pages and put them down and picked them up again. She looked at Dumbledore with an expression that contained several years of accumulated unsaid things, and then looked at Harry and said, "The 3rd chapter's logical gap in the runic compression theory. You've been working on it since before Hogwarts. Since I was 10, Harry said. She was quiet. The ward work on the Gryffindor common room. There were 3 incidents in your 2nd year where the ward signatures shifted for no apparent reason, she said. Hermione was mapping the castle's ward architecture, Harry said. Some of the work was adjacent to the common room boundaries. She was careful. She was, McGonagall said. I could never identify the source. She looked at Hermione. That was very careful work. Thank you, Professor, Hermione said. Remus Lupin, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table and who had received the briefing document with the specific expression of someone who had always suspected something without knowing what, said, the parcel tongue. When did Sirius know? The night of Godric's Hollow, Sirius said. The garden's sweep. I felt the signature, and I didn't know what it meant until the library, a few hours later. I've known since then. Lupin looked at Harry for a long moment. James would have been. He stopped. He said, he would have wanted to know what you became, he said. I know, Harry said. Julian sat at the table and received the order's adjustment to his position with the quality he had been developing, not without difficulty, not without the specific internal work of a person whose identity had been constructed around a role they were now being asked to step beside rather than inhabit, but genuinely, without performance. Molly Weasley, who had known Julian since his first summer at the Burrow, looked at him across the table with the expression of someone reassessing what they were seeing. She had known, in the specific way that a woman who had fed him 3 meals a day for several summers could know, that something had shifted in him since the chamber. She had attributed it to ordinary growing. Now she was revising the attribution. Are you all right? She said. I'm working on it, Julian said. This was honest, which was the register he was now using, and honest was better than the performances that had preceded it. Arthur Weasley, beside her, gave Julian the specific look of a man who had raised 6 children and recognized the expression of someone doing the real work of becoming themselves. Fred and George Weasley, present in the room for reasons that were officially uncertain but practically obvious given their talent for finding their way into rooms where important things were happening, exchanged a look with each other that contained approximately 40% admiration and 60% furious recalibration of everything they thought they had understood about the younger Potter. After the meeting in the hallway, Harry found Julian. The Order looked at me differently tonight, Julian said. Yes, like they were recalibrating. They were. I'm not the center of it anymore. You were never supposed to be the center of it. That was Dumbledore's construction, Harry said. I know that. He was quiet. It's still something to get used to. Julian looked at the staircase. Hermione, the extraction, he said. She's ready. We've scheduled it. You asked her what it costs. Yes, what did she say? She said the cost was manageable and that she had already managed it in her calculations, and that I should stop asking about the cost and let her do the work, Harry said. Julian looked at him. She's extraordinary, he said. You said that in the graveyard. It keeps being true. Yes, Harry said. They stood in the hallway in the specific silence of 2 people who had arrived, through different routes and across considerable distance, at something that was not what either of them had started toward, but that was, in the way of things that were true rather than planned, exactly what was needed. After, Julian said. Yes, Harry said. After it's done, the final confrontation, everything, we have another long conversation. About what? About what comes next. For both of us, on our own terms. He looked at Harry. Together, if that works for you, Julian said. That works for me, Harry said. It was not a dramatic statement. It was the precise truth of where they were. Julian nodded. He went upstairs. Harry stood in the hallway for a moment, reading the quality of the house around him. The Order's house. Sirius's house. The house that had been accumulating things since before any of them were born and had become accustomed to the weight of significance. He went to find Hermione. She was in the library, which was where she was when she was between preparations, and the next preparation had not yet started. The lamp was burning amber. She had 2 books open on the table and her research journal beside them, and the specific quality of someone who had been doing this long enough that the library was not a room she occupied, but a state she inhabited. He sat across from her. She looked up. The extraction, he said. Thursday, she said. What does it cost you? He said. She looked at him with the specific quality she brought to questions she had answered before that were being asked again for reasons that were different from the previous asking. She recognized that Julian had been in the hallway, and that something had been said, and that Harry was asking the question he had failed to ask for 2 years. Less than losing you would, she said. That's not an answer, Harry said. Yes, it is. She looked at the journal. The channel is bidirectional. When I draw the fragment out, the connection runs both ways for the duration of the extraction. I will feel what it feels like to carry what you carry. The fragment, the resonance, the full weight of what was putting you on that night in 81, she said. She said this in the same tone she used for everything, precise, clear, without unnecessary modulation. How long? Harry said. Minutes, not longer. And after. After it's done, the connection closes. The resonance dissipates. You'll be yourself, without the fragment. I'll be myself, having experienced something I expect will be. She paused, which was unusual. Hermione Granger paused for approximately 1 second. Significant, is there another way? Harry said. I've spent 2 years looking for one. There isn't, she said. If I asked you not to, you won't. How do you know? He said. Because you understand, as well as I do, that some things have a cost, and the cost doesn't change what needs doing. You've understood that since you were 10. That's why we work. She looked at the lamp. You've been carrying something that was never yours. Thursday, it stops, she said. Harry was quiet for a long time. The 3rd chapter's logical gap, he said. I have a new approach, she said. Show me, he said. She showed him. The library held them in the specific way it always had. The amber lamp light, the accumulated smell of old bindings. The particular quality of a room where thinking happened in earnest, and where, over the years, 2 children had grown into something neither the wizarding world's story nor Dumbledore's carefully arranged narrative had left space for. Outside the window, London conducted its ordinary business in the ordinary way of a city that did not know and did not need to know what was being built. Quietly and without audience, in the library of an old house in the late hours of a Wednesday night. Thursday came. The extraction was performed in the library, because that was where it had always been most clearly possible to think, and what Hermione was doing on Thursday required thinking of a quality that only the library had ever reliably provided. It lasted 9 minutes. Afterward, Harry sat very still in the library chair and felt the absence of something he had been carrying since before he had words for it. The word in the wrong language was gone. The cold behind his scar, the low hum that had been present since the night in Godric's Hollow, and that he had managed for so long that he had stopped noticing he was managing it, was silent. Hermione was across the table, not moving. Hermione, he said. She said, I'm fine. Her voice was even. She was the kind of person who was fine, and when she was not fine, she became very still and very methodical until fine was within reach again. "What was it like?" he said. "Like being inside something very old and very cold and very angry that had been waiting a long time to be more than it was." She looked at the table. "He was afraid of you, even then, even as a fragment in a child. The fear was the loudest thing," she said. "It's gone," Harry said. "Yes, both of us. Yes." She reached across the table and picked up her quill. She dated the journal entry, the extraction complete, the 6th Horcrux destroyed. The list finished. Harry watched her write. "Thank you," he said. She did not say "you're welcome," because that was not the right register for what had happened, and she knew it. She looked at him once, briefly, with the expression she brought to things that were true, and that therefore required no further commentary. She went back to the journal. He reached for the runic compression notes. The 3rd chapter's logical gap was still there. Hermione's new approach was promising. It would require working through the implications carefully, and they had, for the first time in 4 years, the luxury of working through something carefully without anything else on the list pressing. The lamp burned amber, the books held them. Outside, London continued. The final confrontation did not happen at Hogwarts. It happened in the countryside of Yorkshire on a grey morning in the late spring, in a location that Harry had known since March, and that Voldemort had believed was secret. It was not secret. It had been tracked for months through the resonance that no longer lived in Harry, but that he had mapped with sufficient precision during the years it did. 4 people were there: Harry, Hermione, Julian, and Sirius. Dumbledore was at Hogwarts, which was where Voldemort still believed the confrontation would occur, and where Voldemort's attention was therefore directed. This was useful. Voldemort, mortal for the first time in decades, encountered 4 people who had spent the better part of 5 years specifically preparing for this moment. It was not brief. It was not painless. Julian had a new burn on his right arm before the morning was over, adding to the old one from the first task. Sirius had a cut across his left shoulder that would scar. Hermione had an expression afterward that was the expression of someone who had done something that required doing, and was processing what that meant with the thoroughness she applied to everything. Harry had the specific quality of someone from whom something has been removed, and who is, for the first time, meeting the world without the extra weight. What was gone, not just the fragment that Hermione had extracted, the resonance that had run through everything, the cold certainty of a presence that had been present since before Harry had a name for it. The list was complete. The war was over. The prophet announced it the following morning, with a headline in the largest typeface it had used since the announcement of Julian Potter's survival 14 years earlier. The headline named Julian as the boy who lived, the vanquisher, the one who had ended the Dark Lord's threat, once and for all. Julian read the headline at the kitchen table in Sirius's house, with the specific expression of a person reading something that is approximately 60% accurate and deciding not to correct it at breakfast. 60%, he said. The 40% they're missing is ours, Harry said. The 40% is considerably more interesting anyway, said Hermione, without looking up from the prophet's inside pages, which contained a much smaller article about the Board of Governors' vote to expand Hogwarts' curriculum autonomy under recent governance reforms. Sirius poured more tea and said nothing, because some mornings did not require commentary. Later that day, in the library, Harry wrote the final entry in the 5th notebook. The entry was brief, because the significant things had already been said in the previous 4 volumes, and everything that remained was, in the best possible sense, ordinary. He wrote, "List complete. All entries resolved. No further entries anticipated." He thought for a moment. He wrote, "Julian asked what comes next. I told him, whatever we want." He thought about that. He wrote, "For the first time since the night in Godric's Hollow, whatever we want is an available answer." He closed the notebook. He looked at the library around him, the shelves that had been accumulating things since before he was born, the amber lamp, the books in their correct positions, the chair where Sirius had fallen asleep on the first night with a baby on the mattress, and a book on ancestral magical inheritance in his lap, and the beginning of a correct instinct about what the quiet child on the floor of his library was going to become. He looked at Hermione, who was across the table, working on the third chapter's logical gap. She had, the previous afternoon, found the resolution. She had presented it to Harry with the specific care of someone who has been building an argument for 7 years and has finally organized it into the form the argument requires. It was, as she had expected, elegant. It was also, as Harry had expected, something that neither of them could have arrived at alone. He picked up his quill. He began the 6th notebook. At the top of the first page he wrote, "The third chapter's logical gap, resolved." Below that, in smaller letters, subsequent problems to be determined. Methods, the usual ones. Location. Here, he underlined the last word. The library was quiet the way it was always quiet. The quiet of a room that had been holding significant things for a long time and had become accustomed to the weight of them, and that had, in the amber light of a lamp that had been burning since the first night, held 2 children while they became something nobody had been planning for. Outside the window, London continued its ordinary business. Inside the library, the work continued. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.